really, really honored and excited for our guest this week, who is Michael Holt of Savage and Saint. He's an accomplished martial artist and a man I've always admired when I've seen him either working out on a heavy bag or down at Inos Santos. He's also one of the premier mindfulness and meditation instructors around. And to have him unpack not only some of the best practices of a mindfulness practice, but the fact that we absolutely need to, it is our duty and responsibility. And he describes meditation as the pinnacle of personal responsibility. And I would add to that the pinnacle of personal resiliency.
And for those of you that have said, I've tried meditation and it doesn't work for me, this podcast is for you. Make sure to listen up.
All right, good morning, y'all handsome humans. Welcome to another edition of the Wenner Folsom podcast, where we're unpacking some of the latest battle-tested leadership and resiliency work. We got an extraordinary guest today, Mr. Michael Holt of Savage and Saint. Boy, just an honor having you on today. I consider you a friend. I admire you. And there's a couple little things I just wanted to give you a shout out before we get started, just so other people can get up to speed real quick with us. Boy, to watch you work out on the bags down at Gold's Gym here in Venice, impressive, cool, shall we say, very savage. Yeah. And you also are one of these rare men that is actually living their brand around resiliency. So, you know, your breath work, your meditation practice, the way you live oftentimes outside the norm of conventional world, that's the saint, the savage and the saint. And so stoked to have you on. Josh, always a pleasure to be with you, brother. Yep. And we're going on the journey. So one of the cool things that you did just to launch us out is a couple months ago, you were presenting to the K4 Nation, our men's group, K4 Nation. And one of the cool things that I will never forget was when we were talking about meditation. And that seems to be, for many men, particularly in the warrior class field, as something that's a little squishy. It's a little questionable. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit less robust of a practice than some of the other martial arts or jujitsu or everything. And you responded by saying, meditation is actually one of the most savage practices. I want to just launch out with, share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, man. Firstly, thank you for your kind words and thank you for the invitation. I look at you as a friend and someone I admire as well. And you too, Josh. But yeah, I really think of it as my mission to call those warrior archetype men into the work of training the mind. Guys who would look down their nose at meditation practice like it's hippy dippy trippy or new age. Namaste, kumbaya, you know, that ain't it. That's not my experience. And I've had the good fortune of encountering and being schooled by teachers and practitioners who are really deep in the work of waking up into the truth of what reality is. And if you're going to embark on that journey, you better check your nuts, because it will require everything that you have. We live in a culture where distraction is the primary means of emotional regulation. There's always something else to soak your attention into, to soften the feelings that we run away from, to soften the reality that we have no idea what's going on here, really. We don't know where we come from or where we're going. We don't know how long we have. These are big questions that are terrifying. And meditation is the heroic act of sitting in those questions with no distraction. So in my view, it's not only a savage thing or a savage practice, it's the pinnacle. And if you don't believe me, sit still for 30 minutes, see what comes up, and do that every day. Or go on a 3-day retreat, a 5-day retreat, a 2-week retreat, a 1-month retreat. And then you tell me if you think this requires balls or not. Because I do.
Facts.
Now, here's the thing, Savage and Saint. A very black and white view would be meditation is the saintly act and martial art training is the savage act. But really, it's like the yin yang symbol where one is hiding in the other at all times. So look at the motivation. If your motivation is to heal, to be of service, to become the greatest version of yourself that's possible, and to engage the greatest work that you can for the highest benefit of all beings, if that's the motivator, that saintly motivator can propel you into the savage discipline required to train your mind. And if you look at the martial art, thank you for your compliment on my heavy bag work, a saintly motivator of being an individual who can keep the peace, who can go into a dangerous situation and affect a peaceful outcome, requires that you know a thing or two about how to be violent. So a saintly motivator can propel a savage action, and a savage action can be propelled by a saintly motivator. So it's like the same thing. It's all the same thing.
Where do you find most people struggle with entering that practice? Like, what comes up? Is it just the uncomfortability of sitting with the self? Is it the different distractions they have, which you mentioned earlier? Is it past trauma or our culture where we haven't learned that it's okay to be with different emotions and make that the meditation? Or what shows up from your perspective?
I would say all of the above. An uncomfortability sitting into what you might say in the meditation vernacular as a lack of equanimity. Equanimity is a skill that you cultivate in your formal practice, which is the capacity to be with the moment as it is, whether it's comfortable or not, just to accept reality on its terms, not your own. I think a major hindrance that most people probably encounter in developing a meditation practice is the notion that it should be relaxing, or it should be a spa day, or that it's a checking out, that it's some passive process. It is wrangling your mind, your monkey mind, and training it to be still. You do this gently, and you're friendly with yourself throughout the process. But the skills that we cultivate in the formal practice, primarily concentration, equanimity, and sensory clarity, like an actual moment by moment, palpable felt sense of your body and the energy moving through your body, emotion, those skills take practice. So I think the pitfall for a lot of individuals is I tried meditation, it doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. The one human mind that meditation doesn't work for, through the thousands and thousands of years that this wisdom has been being passed mind to mind, heart to heart. I'm the one that it doesn't work for, because I tried it for a 2-hour workshop and it I didn't feel anything. You have to be willing to engage the practice with consistent discipline over a long, long period of time to make progress. So I think the Dalai Lama once said, with regard to your progress in the practice every day and check in about every 10 years as to how the practice is progressing.
Yeah.
It's like, I just sat for 20 minutes and I don't really feel that much different. Meditation doesn't work for me. Come on, man. This is a lifetime practice.
But hey, this is everything though. Like consistency over time.
Think of any skill that's worth having. It requires consistent discipline over time. And meditation, the skills that we cultivate in the practice are no different. But the skills that we cultivate in the practice don't only coalesce to form fruitful meditation practice. It's not like once the bell rings, those skills go away. Now you step into the arena of your life more grounded, more present, more self-aware, more receptive to the information in the space. So you become a more skillful human being. The practice makes you a better person.
I certainly drive better after I've been meditating.
Sure, man.
That's when my asshole comes out the strongest.
Yeah.
I'm a much kinder driver. I'm a much kinder husband and father.
Yeah.
And boss. That's the word on the street. So I started meditating about 10 years ago. And, right along with sobriety, those two things are probably the most transformational big events of my life.
Yeah. So whatever roles you have to play in your life, a leader of an organization, a father, a husband, a martial artist, the practice of your mind is the common thread in all of those endeavors. So if you come into a right relationship with your mind, then you'll be better at all the things that you do. The skills that you cultivate in the practice are meta skills that have tendrils that reach out into every arena of your life. And I think it's the greatest act of service that you can offer the world, is to become a man with a full heart and a clear mind and a clear vision. If everyone would do that, the world would be a lot different, but we can't control what everyone else does. I think meditation practice is the pinnacle of personal responsibility, of taking responsibility for yourself.
I agree with that. And I also believe that it's a practice on being present, and it's deeply connected with the breath, which is also present. And I notice the deeper I get into practice, the more you have to deal with uncomfortability. And I think men just sometimes don't want to do hard things. And we get in the way of, it's much easier for me to be in the future, focusing on some other future thing to avoid being in the present. And I think other people get caught in the past, and they get kind of bogged down by their victim story or even traumas that actually happened to them, but they relive those traumas. And the meditation practice, at least for me, is I have to face those and start to let those things move through me. And it's tied to emotion. It's tied to, there's a deep freeing, at least is what I've experienced, is the deeper I go, I feel free when I can sit with it. And it actually takes it from this big thing that I'm fighting, or Philip and I talk about the dragon a lot. And it allows me to start to ride that dragon when I can do that ownership self-practice with it.
Absolutely, man. It's about freedom. There's an option, we all have an option as human beings. We can stuff the pain of our past experiences down and not feel them. It doesn't mean that those experiences or those feelings, just because we're not aware of them, are not dictating your course of action in the world. And you are free to hold that whole bag of shit and take it to your grave, where it will be unwound when you die. Or
no, give it to your kids.
Yeah,
that's the one. And everybody else you meet. You're not holding on to that shit yourself.
Right. Good.
You're handing that shit to fucking everybody in the world.
Good correction. You're absolutely spot on. Or you can summon the heroic discipline and strong determination to start to let that stuff go while you're still alive, to engage the practice of dying before you die, and to take freedom. Now, the bad news is you have to feel that stuff on the way out. The good news is you're feeling it on the way out. It takes an enormous amount of energy to hold everything in and down. And as you start to create the stillness, the spaciousness required to allow that gunk to start to liberate, now you have an enormous amount of vital energy that was previously used to hold everything in. Now you can channel that energy into the things in your life that you find meaningful. I'm 37 years old. I have more fucking energy pumping through my body than I did when I was 22. And I look at my teachers who are elders, talking about 70s, 80s. They have these bright eyes and a pep in their step. They are highly productive. They spend all their time teaching and being of service, writing books, speaking engagements. They're empty. They're not holding anything. They're free. They're free.
Michael Gay, who was our last guest, we had a big discussion about his analogy of the tourniquet, that oftentimes particular warrior class people who have dealt with trauma will put tourniquets on to lock that energy down so they don't bleed out. And you just basically said the exact same thing, is that meditation is the act of taking the tourniquet off.
Right.
And it's going to be messy and painful, and on the way out, experiencing of that trauma is uncomfortable, but there is then vitality in life. So really good, cool bookend to hear men saying the same shit, just with different language.
Right. So on the other side of what scares you is a more liberated version of yourself. And let's not paint meditation too badly as a miserable slog through your shit. It's totally worth doing. And just to be clear, with regard to trauma, some people have had a really hard life and they've encountered really capital big T traumas. But if that's not your experience, it doesn't mean that there's still not unexamined emotional residue in your body. We go through life. We encounter difficult situations when we're kids, as we grow old. Sometimes some event exceeds our capacity to fully metabolize it emotionally in the moment. So it's just stored in your body for later processing. And that happens over and over and over and over and over. And so if you engage the practice of stillness on a regular basis, you're allowing the intelligence of your body a moment to start to unwind all the gunk that it's collected. And you don't even need to know what exactly the cause of it was. I have a teacher who says, with regard to these somaticized emotional afflictions, calls it the pool of poison and pain. And as it starts to liberate through the practice, it would be like taking a quart of oil and trying to figure out, okay, what plants make this oil up? It's just a collection of a whole bunch of stuff. It's all blended together. You don't need to know. What you need to know is that it's being felt on the way out. And by the way, the emotional releases that come through the meditation practice, if they're big and intense, big releases, we're talking about like a 4 or 5 second wave of emotion. It's over quickly. But you're training this skill of equanimity to be there for the letting go, to hold an intensity of emotion that the untrained mind runs away from by distracting yourself from the feeling with some thought that creates an emotion that you're more comfortable with feeling. Or scroll the gram, or fucking Netflix binge, or get shit-faced, or whatever it is. You know, again, this is the savage, heroic act of turning toward yourself and your life and reality as it is, without needing it to be different. That's freedom. And to be free, nothing has to change but your perspective. And that can happen right now.
I'd also say it's deeply connected with some of the mental health issues that are happening. And I just see those, a lot of them, as symptomatic of this built up gunk as you're describing it. And one thing I would say, as you start to embark on this path, I know for me, what I didn't think I had anything, I was living in just an unaware space. When I started leaning in, I started noticing layers and layers and layers of more uncomfortability. So it is a process and a practice where you continually learn another layer. And then you might find, oh, wait, I didn't realize I had some anxiety, because I was numb. So I had a numb practice and I couldn't feel anything. And then as I started to sit in the numbness, all of a sudden I realized that was my protective layer. And beneath the numb there's layers of anxiety or other heavy stuff that was why I went numb. So it's a ongoing practice that the meditation is what that becomes the meditation. So the anxiety becomes the meditation, the uncomfortable emotions, whatever it may be, become your teacher. And they become the part that, instead of, as you're pointing out, wanting to let go, at least my practice, it's actually learning just to be with. And in that, they start to leave. And then it almost becomes like a friend that you're like, oh, here's my ally. And at some point they start to leave and you're like, well, there goes my ally. And there's another layer, right? So it's just a continual layering. Have you noticed a similar exploration on your own journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Analogy that I like to use is that classic movie, The Shawshank Redemption, where good old Andy Dufresne just chipped away at it every day. And he started to get himself more and more and more free. But he had to go through a lot of shit, literally. I mean, at one point he was, I think, swimming through a mile of shit, actual shit. But because he did that, he found himself outside the prison cell, a free man. So that's similar in our practice. We have to chip away, swim through some shit. But again, I don't want to make meditation sound like it's this hard slog through shit, because you also learn very useful life skills. Like, we can all agree that our minds are very powerful, and that the mind can pull us out of the experience of the present moment, create through memory, planning, or fantasy an actual emotion in real time that doesn't feel good. Have you ever thought your way into a shitty feeling? So there's a flip side to that coin. You know, you can learn how to be intentional and conscious with the power of your mind, and your mind can become the source of positivity, of rest, of freedom. You just have to learn how to use this tool behind your eyes. Is the greatest piece of equipment in the known universe. We just have to become intentional with using it, because if you don't learn how to train it, it can really create problems where there are none.
Hey, we thank you for listening to the Wenner Folsom podcast. Just a couple quick notes. First, if you are a man and you're looking for an honorable and inspiring group of men to hold you accountable and challenge you to grow in your relationships, your fitness, your career, your finances, and your life, go to www.k4men.com. And if you are a veteran, first responder, or man or woman who deals with trauma, and you're looking for some resiliency tools and skills for you, your team, or your organization, go to valorresiliency.com. Hope to see you there. Back to the podcast.
Hey, so I think a lot of people, you're preaching to the choir with the three of us, who have a meditation practice, who have dealt with trauma, who are in the space. Let's say that there's a warrior class man or woman. Here's a combat vet, here's a trauma nurse or a firefighter who hasn't been able to do it. Maybe they've sat down and tried, didn't work, or they think listening to this talk that somehow you got the magic book or the instruction manual. Like, where do they go? What are some of the ways to just start this journey, that if there was a couple best practices for the newbie or the meditation person who failed and then said, that's not for me, what are some of the tenets of it?
Well, nowadays meditation is pretty popular. I mean, you can get an app on your phone that can give you some kind of basic instruction. You can read a book. At some point, I think it would be wise to actually seek out a teacher and be in a relationship with a teacher who's a little further ahead of you on the path, who's been where you are and can see where you are, but isn't so far ahead on the path that the way they talk about the practice just is totally over your head. I would say the foundational skill, in my view, when I work with students, the foundational skill to cultivate first and foremost is concentration, the staying power of the mind. And so you can do that first just by simply counting your breath or by feeling the breath. Most people are very, very distracted and they lack the concentrational skills that are necessary for fruitful practice. So your first goal in practice would be to establish concentration. And then you can think of that like developing core strength before you start loading patterns with resistance training. If you try to hit a heavy back squat before you've developed the core strength, then you're not going to get anywhere or you're going to hurt yourself. So concentration is the first skill. And that's really not hard to do with like a month of consistent practice.
How long for somebody who's sitting down for the first time and they're counting their breaths? And it's going to suck, right? I mean, that's an uncomfortable thing to do.
Here's another thing I'll point out. So how long? One of my teachers, Shinzen Young, he defines formal meditation practice as a period of at least 10 minutes where you're bringing the totality of your attentional resources to a given technique. 10 minutes would be a good start. And here's the thing, when you're trying to cultivate concentration practice, this is what I tell people when I'm teaching. It's like, you're going to lose count. You're going to lose concentration. The mind is going to wander. That's what it does. And so in those moments where you've caught the mind wandering and realize that you've totally lost concentration, there's two options there in that moment. Option number one is, I fucking suck at this. This fucking sucks. Fuck this. Which is what I think what most people do.
This is a life metaphor you're giving here right now. There's two choices to everything.
Option number two is, aha, I experienced a moment of awakening. In this moment, I woke up into my sensing experience. I developed the capacity to have a bird's eye view on my mind and saw that it was distracted. A deeper part of me is waking up, metacognition, the capacity to reflect on what I'm thinking about. Yes, that's the practice. The entire practice is none other than noticing that the mind has wandered and bring it back to what you're wanting to focus on. And over the course of time, concentration gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Mind wanders less and less and less. And you find yourself in a place where you've turned your mind into an ally, into a servant. It sits where you want it to sit and it stays. So if you notice that the mind has wandered and you brought it back, bravo, that's the point. And if a 10-minute period of practice is doing that 10,000 times, that's the practice. Just keep going. You have to quantize frustration. Similar in the martial art, the difference between a white belt and a black belt is that the black belt was willing to suffer and struggle and look like an idiot for a long time. And then all of a sudden, he's a black belt, but there was no random moment where he just got all of these skills. They were just cultivated over a long, long period of time. It's the same on the pillow.
Yeah, it's also a deep practice of developing awareness. That's the consistent theme. And developing awareness is what actually gives us power, because we're able to now choose. And if we're not able to have awareness, we can't choose. We're in reactionary states. And so
Yeah.
developing that awareness in your, as you mentioned, in martial arts, it's like, you know, you're with the black belt or even a brown belt, like they're in such control. I know when I'm rolling with a brown belts and I'm breathing and panting and can't even notice what's happening. And they're just like super calm and slow movements. Yeah. And it's like, I actually feel really safe with them versus another white belt. We're both panting and, using, we just are unaware. And I think the translation is in meditation. Imagine somebody who's the equivalent of a black belt and how that shows up in their life. Like I know a lot of the black belts, Philip and I've talked about, if never fight, yet they're some of the most dangerous men here that are in existence because they don't need to, right? It's like
that's the paradox, man. That's the paradox of the martial art path. The better that you get at violence, the less you ever actually even want to take it there. It's because you don't have anything to prove to anybody. You've proved yourself to yourself in the dojo and you've been humbled. Nobody wins any skill in martial art without getting their shit kicked in a few times on the way up. And that's a humbling process. So by the time you get the skills, you've been humbled and you don't have to prove yourself to anybody. I couldn't agree more with what you said. The truly dangerous people, I know some dangerous people who are also the sweetest people you'd ever want to meet.
We always have a joke, like we've got a bunch of black belts in K4, and universally there's this weird thing that when you shake hands with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, there's this weird soft handshake. It's like a very almost delicate, tender, like there's no robust, manly, here's my power. Right. It's like, I don't want to hurt you with any of this thing that I'm carrying around. It's a really unusual dynamic with black belts.
I remember years ago, this is probably 9 or 10 years ago, I was training at my academy and we were training Kali and we were training some like vital target knife templates. And I never really I think that was my first exposure to like the reality of the blade. And it's kind of a weird feeling. I just remember like it was kind of gross and dark, but like really interesting. Like if you want to kill somebody, where do you stab them? And so as the teacher was talking about it, he said, he was talking about a backhand slash to the carotid artery. And he said, after you get that, make sure you put your hand up because that blood is going to come out at like a high PSI and it could get in your eye. And I was just like, what? But at that exact moment, a few advanced students were in the corner of the dojo and they circled around something, 3 or 4 of them. And I come to find out that a bumblebee had flown into the gym and like broken its wing. And they were all very gingerly guiding it out so that it didn't get killed. And at that moment, like those 2 things happened within 5 seconds of each other. And I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I never forgot that. And that informs my practice. That moment informs my practice.
The big one for me in either jiu-jitsu or karate is seeing the black belts mop the floors.
Yeah.
That was the humility that sat underneath mastery for me. And that's the one I won't forget. And whenever I'm leading teams out at work, I show up first. I leave last. I'll do the job that other people don't want to do because of that moment of watching the black belts mop the floor.
That's great, man. The practice of humility.
Yeah. Take care of the bumblebee, mop the floor.
Yeah. Chop the wood, carry the water. That's what they say in Zen tradition. They also say after the ecstasy, the laundry. So you stay on your meditation cushion for years and years and years, and you will have peak experiences. The real psychedelic is a clear mind that's really able to see reality as it is. That's a trip. That's the real trip. But after you have those experiences, you do the laundry. You fucking change your kid's diaper. You go to work. You appreciate the mundane side of life. You're not a state junkie in meditation. You're not chasing some transcendent thing. You're just letting whatever comes come. After the ecstasy, the laundry. Chop wood, carry water. Sweep the mats.
Return with treasure.
Yeah.
I think that is kind of a big challenge with a lot of the men's movement now, is I think that we're doing a great job uh, taking men out of the ordinary world into the special world where there's tremendous knowledge and awareness. We're just not, or maybe we don't have a roadmap or models of returning all of that awareness and vitality back home again. I'm not seeing a lot of leadership of enlightened men who are willing to return back, and change the diaper of society. I just see people who are staying in the special world, kind of as escapism. I think that there's a tremendous challenge of a lot of the men's movement of becoming lost boys, just never willing to grow up and change the diaper. I think that's the next phase, exactly what you said. Like, when are you going to come back to run for the school board and
Yeah.
that work?
Right. Yeah, I think that a man has to be honest with himself, and if periods of solitude or like retreat into the special world, as you put it, are called for, then you'll need to do that. But like you said, at some point, you have to come back and share what you've gained and what you are. And that's the real practice. That's the practice of service.
Yeah. Doing the laundry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also find there's this big pattern that I'm seeing, and I see it a lot in warrior culture. I see it a lot in men's work, and even the practices we're talking about. From, you mentioned these states, like I think early on we're searching for these certain states that almost keep us up high, and then there's a balancing of reaching down low. And so I've noticed that let's say somebody's into addiction or substance, they're chasing that feeling to get high, and then there's a crash and they get low. Same thing if somebody's hypervigilant and they live in a hypervigilant career day in and day out, or they're deployed in the military or doing something, trauma nurse, whoever it is, hypervigilant, and they crash to this low. And so we get addicted to these extreme states and their balancers. And the practice I'm finding is living in that resilient zone in the middle, which is initially very boring. And like, as you mentioned earlier, mundane, but that becomes the way of like appreciating the mundane, because you actually takes you away from these extremes that you're hunting, and you
Right.
actually start to accept this resilient zone as more equilibrium, or that the balancer's like, if I live here 80% of the time, life's going to be really good. If I'm living here 80% of the time, life's very chaotic. And so I find this is another trend that I'm at least hunting and seeing through this conversation. I'm also seeing that as another pattern.
Yeah. I mentioned equanimity before, the capacity to be with the moment as it is. And initially, I think in getting started in the practice of meditation, you have to bring equanimity to feeling frustrated, to feeling bored, or to feeling emotions that you've been successfully avoiding. But as the practice deepens, you can find yourself in some special states, blissful states, and then you'll need to bring equanimity to those as well. So equanimity implies not pushing away uncomfortability, but also not clinging to special states, because this too shall pass. Nothing lasts. So the less preference you have, the less suffering you have. The great way is easy for those who have no preference. That's a quote one of my teachers recently shared with me.
Say it again, Michael.
The great way is easy for those who have no preference. Make the slightest distinction between this and that, and heaven and hell are set infinitely apart. The skill is just to be with what is. Simple, not easy, but that's it, man. That's the whole work. That's the whole path. Right now, it's like this. Okay. That's freedom.
That's it. That's the acceptance, accepting what is.
Yeah, that's freedom.
How do I know? Byron Katie would say, how do I know it's supposed to be this way? Because it's what is.
Yeah.
Right
now it's like this. Okay.
Right. The big introduction that when I'm trying to build a case for warrior class men and women who are at least aware of meditation, but haven't realized that it's a central pillar to resiliency. Just kind of sharing the Arjuna's journey in the Bhagavad Gita, where basically the warlord of all of India is taught by one of the gods this amazing skill that will allow him to defeat all his enemies and be absolved of all guilt. And then he's taught how to meditate. And for me, it's a an ancestral legacy of the warrior class that we get meditation. It's the thing that has allowed us the power to conduct the missions that others cannot and will not do, but also is the tool that brings us home. And to not have access to this in the Bhagavad Gita, that God-given gift to the warrior class, is to be profoundly handicapped. It's just like going into battle with no armor and no roadmap home. I mean, it really feels like, particularly for the young men and women, and that's obviously the ones that do the worst shit because they don't even have any critical risk assessment function happening in their brains yet, to send them off into harm's way without at least some introduction to a self-mastery, mindfulness, meditation practice. It's bordering on negligent. I mean, I'm really that strong about it. Our culture, which is the best trained military we have seen in 1,000 years, that's our military, and yet we're not teaching them that. Nuts.
I agree with you, man. That's very well said.
Yeah, we also teach it in our resiliency protocol as a purification strategy, meaning we give an analogy of like changing the oil. And if you don't, you put the oil in, and if you don't ever clean it, it gets black and sludgy. And so people can do regulation, which for them is just getting them regulated. But if the sludge is there, this is a purification practice to start to move through the sludge. And so it's adding this as a daily protocol is essential for purification. And you do it over long periods of time, and you actually start to clean that engine, and it runs really, to your point, in that clear mind is that in essence, you're just continually pouring clear golden oil in, and it just runs right through. It'd be the metaphor where it doesn't carry that sludge because you keep purifying it consistently.
Right. You're creating the space to metabolize whatever the day before brought, and you're approaching the new day as a new person. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said. It is the ultimate quintessential purification practice.
So if you're listening to this and you're going, what is all this meditation? Hopefully by now you see different perspectives, different mindsets on why this is important, why it's essential, that it's not going to be easy. It's a savage practice, but it'll really bring you the freedom that you're looking for. And we really believe it's essential. And we're going to be talking a lot more of it in future podcasts that we do. And if you ever come see us at an event or a retreat or a training, Michael, how can guys get a hold of you? If somebody's interested in learning more or working with you as a teacher, how would they be able to get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best thing to do would be to go to savageandsaint.com. And that's my website there. And you can email me, or there's links for my socials there. And you can sign up for my newsletter to stay in the loop for upcoming courses, online courses, and live events and retreats. So hit me there, savageandsaint.com.
Awesome, man. Been so fun hanging out with you.
It's always great to rap with you guys, man. I'm so happy that our paths crossed, and I'm proud to call you my friends.
Allies on the journey.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Well, hey guys, people watching, commit to this. You deserve it, and all your people and all your projects really demand it. And so, hey, stay battle tested, guys.
All right, guys. So your challenge this week after listening to this podcast is spend 10 minutes a day focusing on concentration, practicing your meditation practice. Thanks for joining us, and stay battle tested.